to the new episode of Full Funnel Live. As promised, today we are going to chat about ICP, Ideal Customer Profile development for the account-based marketing programs. We'll try to use less abbreviations today, or at least explain them. And we collected all the questions you guys asked us. We saw that there are a lot of misconceptions about ICP development for the account-based marketing programs, and we want to cover the most essential steps today. As always, I'm co-hosting this episode with my dear co-founder, Vladimir Blagojevic. We are broadcasting from Spain, and let us know, guys, where you all joining us from. Type in the chat where you all tuning in. And while you are sharing, maybe just Vlad, quickly, let's go through today's agenda.
Yeah, so we have heard a lot about ideal customer profile. And when we are thinking about the ideal customer profile, we want to really stress what is the difference between creating an ideal customer profile for an ABM program, account-based marketing program, which is the topic of today, versus creating, let's say, an ICP for the general go-to-market strategy. So that is the first thing to highlight. And then also to really share with you how we create the ideal customer profile, qualification, disqualification criteria, account tiers 1, 2, 3, and buying committee, basically take you through that process as we do it with our clients for ourselves, and then answer all your questions. So with that out of the way, I think we can really start discussing the role of ICP and ABM. But I think, Andre, you wanted to mention something before we dive into the content.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that you guys asked in the questions, we saw a lot, we saw this repetitive question. It was, how can we actually apply ICP for account selection, right? And what technology you will recommend. So very quick note about the tool that we use, and we mention it all the time. Why? Because these guys, they are really developing their product. Company is called DealFront. So what we love about it is that we incorporated this technology into all our ABM processes. Why? Because first of all, they have intent data layer, right? You can see accounts that are visiting your website. You can integrate it with your CRM, like in our case with HubSpot, right? And then you can see all the touch points with these accounts, right? What website pages they have visited, how much time they spent, if they booked a call, that would be incorporated. And now you'll have known accounts. And the second part, which is most important, and this is what we are going to talk about today, right? How can you enrich the buying committee? How can you identify potential needs of these accounts? And this is basically the second part of the insights that this technology provides, right? So you can immediately see the technographics, firmographics criteria, and you can navigate to the employees, right? You can select the right people, you can get their contacts, you can navigate through their LinkedIn profiles. And lastly, all the account insights, right? So you can tune in the different signals about hiring, press releases, news this company was mentioned in, and basically get a holistic overview of what's happening in these accounts, right? You can set up the corporate losses. You know, there are like 72 different signals that you can apply. And the best part is that this company is a product-led growth company, which means that you can try this product for free. So all you need to do is, I would just copy that link and put it in the description. You can go and grab a free demo and get a free trial here. So that being said, let's move forward and let's talk about why ICP development for ABM programs is different from the general go-to-market strategy approach. I think there are two really important examples. When we talk about go-to-market strategy development, and we'll touch this a little bit later today, right? We think about our product units, right? We think about our global approach, where we want to go, etc. While ABM is always specific, right? And we know from practical example that when it comes to account-based marketing programs, the best outcomes are coming from the programs that are focusing on a specific cluster of accounts. By cluster, we mean a category, a segment, if you will, of companies with similar challenges, right? That's really important. And one of the fantastic examples we have, I think, Vlad, you can describe it, how companies are making it wrong when it comes to ABM, right? One of the companies we used to work with and still working is a typical example of how companies approach it in a wrong way. They think about their product, right? Our product is learning management software. Hence, everybody wants to use it just to upskill their people, right? But what happens in reality, I think you can share a lot.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting example because it's an example of a learning solution which can be applied to many different use cases. And this is something that we see, in some cases, very often. You will have different use cases for your product, especially like you can set up any sort of learning program. This learning program can have all sorts of goals. And so when you start talking about things like, okay, we want to focus, let's say, on blended learning experiences, meaning we want to offer a mix of digital and face-to-face learning programs. Yeah, and that's very product-centered or product-oriented, right? So this is the feature that we believe a lot of our customers need, but it has nothing to do with the actual challenge and the reason why customers may buy. So once we started analyzing their customers and the reasons why their previous customers, especially those that led to very high value deals, when we started analyzing why they purchased the product, we discovered a completely different story. Well, first of all, it wasn't even about learning. It was about something that was happening in the business. So for one example, use case was when consumer goods companies are growing by acquiring smaller brands. This is something that very frequently happens in the industry. So these consumer companies, they grow, they acquire internationally different brands and integrate it into the corporation. And what happens then is you have basically new employees that are joining from the acquired company, and you need to make sure that they're onboarded on your processes, they're integrated in the team. You need to make sure that they are not demotivated and leaving the company, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the business needs. And then it makes sense to organize, to create a program to help with the onboarding program, to help with the onboarding process. Yes, it might make sense to have a mix of digital and live face-to-face to create extra motivation and whatnot, to customize the program, et cetera, et cetera. But really, when you think about how we should market that product, who we should go after, how we should communicate about challenges, well, it becomes clear that we should go after companies that had a recent merger or acquisition, and we should be talking about challenges that this merger is causing when it comes to onboarding acquired employees, when it comes to their engagement, motivation, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very, very different way of messaging. It's a very different way of targeting. It's a very, very different way, in one word, of marketing to those accounts.
And what is really interesting in this example is that if you'll just think about the product, right? Upskilling or learning management platform, right? Then literally every company could fit ideal customer profile. Why? Because, by default, every company wants to grow their people, right? this would be absolutely wrong companies that don't want to do it. So literally every company could fit ideal customer profile. Now let's talk about this enterprise clients, right? The example that Vlad just described. This company has completely different set of needs, and they were not thinking about if you'll come and say, hey guys, for this specific challenge, you need learning management platform, it's absolutely irrelevant message for the target buyers. And they don't look for this solution. They don't think in these cases. While this platform actually helps with this. What does it mean, right? It means that you have, when you develop Ideal Customer Profile for ABM programs, right? You need to think in terms of these clusters. You pick up that challenge, and then you, based on the companies that your clients that have similar challenges, right? You start developing ideal customer profile based on them. Why? Because then you can create relevant content that would educate about potential ways of solving this challenge, right? Ads that would be promoting the right, let's say, the right value of the specific problem. You'll be able to create differentiated events, differentiated landing pages, etc. Right? So this is the most important thing. While when it comes to marketing strategy, right, when you develop global ICP, you take completely different approach, right? That's really important. So that being said, let's move forward to the next part and discuss basically how to develop ICP. And that was a great question for Mariana. Is this model only suitable for enterprises? Would it make sense for big, medium clients that are not considered enterprises? Absolutely, yes. And we would love to share with you the 6 pillars of ideal customer profile, the most important elements, and show you practical example, right? So you can see how it looks like. And let's start with the first one. The first one is firmographics that everybody is aware of, right? So firmographics are the criteria like markets where these companies are based, revenue size, stack, whatever could be applied, right? Technographic specific technology that these companies use. You pick up how you can use this data, right? This would be the basic data that later you can apply for account list building when selecting specific accounts for the ABM program, or account qualification, right? Whenever you'll see, for example, if you use technology like DealFront, you see you get intent data, right? And you want to qualify engaged accounts, you apply this. This would be the first set of criteria that you apply to define if you should select this account or you should disqualify this account, right? So these are the basics. Again, where you get this data from, you run the analysis of companies that have a similar challenge, right? So you extract the data from your CRM and see these commonalities between them. And the next step, the next element is account tiers. Let's cover this one.
Yeah, so basically in account-based marketing, if you have an account that can generate, it's not actually surprising to have an account that can generate 10x, like at least like 5-10x, even more revenue than, let's say, an average account. You can't treat them differently, right? And you can spend so much more time, effort on those accounts that have a much higher revenue potential than on those that have a lower revenue potential. In fact, if we look at what we call the lowest revenue potential or tier 3 accounts, we consider them not to even be a candidate for account-based marketing, right? And so it might depend on the complexity and the deal size, etc. But usually this is how we would look at it. Now, how do you identify those tiers? And I'd like to just share just one quick example here, because I think it's always a little bit easier. You can just give me a second, Andre. I'll like to share it with everybody. And I think this just makes it so much easier. So if you take your target accounts from the target cluster that you're looking at. So you're basically looking at your existing customers. You make an expert from your CRM and you sort them by revenue. And what you see here, for those who are looking, you will see that the top 4 accounts are categorized at tier 1. Then the next 7 accounts are categorized as tier 2. And then the rest are categorized as tier 3. And the reason is, or why did we decide to draw the lines where we drew the lines, is basically, you can look at it 2 ways, right? You can look at it, okay, what are the 20% of accounts that are generating 80% of revenue? Well, if we look at this one, we see that approximately tier 1 and tier 2 are generating about 80% of revenue, right? So tier 1 and tier 2 are the 20% of accounts that are generating 80% of revenue. Now, what about tier 1 making a difference between tier 1 and tier 2? Well, if you would apply again the 80-20 principle, so you would end up with essentially 20. So you would end up with, what is it? I think 20% of the 20%, so 4% of accounts that generate 64% of revenue or something like that. Doesn't really matter. The numbers don't really matter. But basically, approximately, let's say the first 5 to 10% of accounts that are generating approximately like 30 to 50, 60% of the revenue, then that would be the tier 1. Then the next, let's say, up to like 20, maybe 30% of accounts that make up and generate altogether another, like, let's say 30% of revenue, and then you will cut off. And another way to look at it is just like looking at the revenue that is being generated by those accounts and seeing where it drops, right? In this case, there is not a significant drop, right? But let's say there is like definitely a drop between something that is almost 10% or above, and then you have below almost 10% in this case, right? So low 1 figures, like between 3 to 5%, and then you have 1%, 2. Maybe we could have also taken this one, 2% and lower, right? So you're looking at either the revenue that is being generated by those accounts. So when you see a big drop, this is where you could draw the line, right? So this is one very practical way to define those tiers. Now, when we define those tiers, I think what's also important is that you're looking at these tiers, you're looking at the accounts that belong to those tiers, and you're studying their firmographics criteria and mapping that to the tier. So very frequently, tier 1 accounts will be their largest accounts. That doesn't have to be. Maybe it's not about the size in terms of the revenue that they generate or the employee size. In some cases, maybe, let's say you're selling customer support software and your main revenue, like you'll generate more revenue if they have more agents. So maybe a call center with, let's say, more than 500 agents is going to be your tier 1, versus, let's say, maybe a huge company that might have just internal, whatever, 100 agents or something like that. So you will look at this kind of firmographics criteria in order for you to be able to later estimate the revenue potential of accounts as you're prioritizing accounts for your account-based marketing program. So, Andre, maybe if you could go back and share again the table with, let me just stop sharing.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly answer a question from Krzysztof. Does tiers 1 to 3 may be different ideal customer profiles? Normally, no, we use tiers to prioritize accounts, right? And if you guys missed our episode, I would drop a link about selecting accounts for the ABM program. So I'm dropping this link in the chat, and you can watch the episode and you can read the entire process and philosophy behind account scoring and account prioritization, right? In some rare cases, you can create ICP for tier 1 accounts, but I won't do it for account-based marketing program. Why? Because it's not the cluster-based. It's not the challenge-based, right? So tier 1, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add what will be different and what is different very frequently is a buying committee structure. So the larger the company, the more buying committee members you will have, and also the titles might be different, the functions might be different. In very large companies, they may have very specialized functions versus maybe like medium-sized companies that have maybe they don't even have the target department, but somebody, let's say they don't have like I don't know, like a big bank may have a fintech department, where like a medium-sized bank may have somebody from their team like taking care of this specific issue, right? So this is something that could be different. So in our example, if we are going after like very, very large organizations, our decision maker might be, for example, VP of marketing, where let's say a medium-sized organization, that might be the CMO. And then in maybe even like smaller organization, maybe even some other executives like the COO or even the CEO might need to approve the deal. So this is something that can be different between tiers.
And let's move forward to the third pillar of ideal customer profile. It's buying committee, because ultimately we are not selling to companies, we are selling to people that are working for these companies, right? And traditionally, in this case, we wanted to simplify the process, because with Vlad we also use 6 roles, but in this case we just want to stick to what everybody understands, but just emphasize on the most important points when it comes to buying committee development, right? Typically, we have 4 roles. Champions, these are the people, and this is the most important person in the organization. A lot of companies think that the most important is the decision maker, but in reality, champions are those people who are selling your solution to their teams, especially if you are climbing, right, to corporate accounts, to enterprises. These are the people that have specific challenge, right? They're in charge of this challenge. They want to solve it, right? But they're not the budget owners. So they need to create a strong business case, right? Why they need to purchase as product or hire a vendor and present it to their decision makers. Typically, a lot of companies, they want to focus only on decision makers, right? Why? Because they are paying for the solution. Their budget pays, right? But these people, first of all, they are attacked by all the vendors. That's the first thing, right? That's why we are kidding saying that these people are wearing, protection helmets just to ignore all the outreach and ads, etc., right? Because just think about probably a lot of you are selling to IT departments, right? Think about VP of IT or CTO in any enterprise organization, how many spammy messages they receive every single week. So it's just hundreds, right? Everybody wants to sell to the same big accounts. So even if you are able to get to the decision makers, in most cases, they will just forward your message to the champions, right? And the problem is that these people, they don't like when vendors are jumping over their heads. So that's the most important thing, right? You need to always build relationship with these champions. Think about them. And then you have 2 more roles, right? Influencers and blockers. Influencers are business units or specific roles that are not negotiating with you. They might not be power users of that product, right? But their opinion is always being asked. Like in our case, whenever mostly we are selling to the marketing teams, right? But sales is essential part of successful ABM programs. So even if we are not engaging directly with sales teams, their opinion will be always asked on the internal meeting. Whenever our champion would come and present, hey, we want to work with full funnel and this is why, right? They would be immediately asking a lot of questions. And these questions would be all about how that would impact our pipeline, how that would impact our workflows, what are the improvements that we can see, what metrics we are going to track, etc. And if you are not addressing this, in most cases, this is why the deals might be losing, right? One of the things that you guys need to know about, and that's the essence of ABM programs, right? One of the things that you need to be aware of is that you are not winning the deals. Your champions are closing the deals for you during the internal meetings, right? When they have your pitch, offer, whatever, right? And then they meet with the decision makers and with influencers, right? Presenting your solution. And your goal is to armor champion with enough arguments why, right? And so they would be able to answer all these critical questions. So that's essential, and that's why it's important to know these roles, right? Because whenever we talk about sales enablement, and sales enablement is a part of, more precisely, we need to call it buyer enablement, right? It's a part of successful ABM program. And to be able to help your champions to sell, you need to know whom they are going to talk with, right? And what typical questions, concerns they might hear, so they would be able to address it. And the last role is the blockers, people who are not interested in your solution for multiple reasons, right? Or who, not interested or who are concerned, right? Typical example, again, you sell technology, right? You sell any specific product, and then the IT team comes and says, hey, but what about integrations? What about security? What about vulnerability? Boom, boom, boom. You get a lot of questions, right? If you can't address them, you are losing the deal. And in most cases, the problem is that a lot of companies, they are not aware of what's happening inside, right? And who is asking these different questions. But the point is, and one of the most important things that you need to aware of, the better you are aware of the buying committee structure and the typical questions that pop up during the internal meetings, the better you'll be able to prepare and armor your champions with enough arguments. The second reason, if you know these people, and with more people from the buying committee you will be able to connect and engage with, the higher are the chances that you'll be able to generate a sales opportunity, and as well you increase the chances to close the sales opportunity. One of the most interesting questions is how to define this buying committee, because companies think, again, they usually think only in terms of decision makers. Hey, we sell to a piece of IT. But we have a very good process. And if just bear to me, just to give you an example, if you apply VP of IT to any corporate account, you might end up with hundreds of potential buyers, right? And then the question is what you are going to do next with these hundreds of buyers in one of the accounts. Normally, companies just add all this context to the display targeting and put them into the outbound cadence, because it's not realistic to engage with all of them, right? So let us quickly share the approach how you can define these different buying committee members.
All right. So basically, what you want to do is, remember, we are focused on tier 1 and tier 2 accounts from the target cluster, the target segment that we are after, the target account cluster that we define as accounts that have a similar challenge, similar use case. And basically what you want to do is you want to take the 5 largest deals there, maybe 5 fastest deals as well. You want to study those deals, and so that you can basically identify people who were involved in those deals from the buyers. This is how you basically look at the history to understand the buying committee. Now, that's the next step. So how do you analyze those deals? Well, if you have a good CRM with a lot of information, you can go in there and you can check all the contacts that are in the CRM, especially those that were engaged. For example, people who were on email threads, who attended the meetings. Maybe you can do a quick search in the calendar with that account domain, so that you can see whether you had, or your salespeople had meetings with them. And you can also look at things like the signatures on the documents, who was signing the documents, whether that's a contract, whether that's another document. That will also be helpful for you to understand who is the actual person who was asked to approve the deal, and who might be also, in this case, the budget owner. And I think another thing to consider as well is, okay, so you have looked at the CRM, but you know that there are specific salespeople that were involved in that deal. And maybe there were, like in some organizations, you might have like 3 different roles or 4 different roles. Like I know one organization when you have an SDR who is trying to book the meeting and maybe doing the first call, but then they transfer this to a specific role called business developer, who is more senior. In a lot of companies, this is an account executive, which is then transferred either to CS and then transferred, or account manager, right? So you actually have all of these different people who were involved at different stages of the deal and might had contact with different people in those stages. So that's another thing to do, is to check with them who else was involved in the deal, who was asked for an advice, who was attending the meetings or calls that might not be logged in the CRM system. And then finally, another piece of advice there is also, and we'll talk more about the account enrichment and customer research, but once you're talking to your customers and interviewing them, you can also ask them, because there will be quote unquote hidden buyers, so people that you might not be aware of, or your salespeople might not be aware of, especially when they are actually getting in contact with the customer or the prospect at a later stage of the buying process. And this is more and more the case, especially if they are reaching out to you as an inbound lead or otherwise. Okay, so this is how you studied the deal history to understand it. But there is another piece of information that is also very interesting, and that is analyzing the product usage, especially if you have this information. Andre was talking about the different roles. There is another role that can really be helpful in understanding the use cases, the jobs to be done, and maybe also could be like the person that actually has the problem are the so-called power users, right? So who are the people who are mostly involved in using the product? You can look at product usage statistics if that's what you have, but you might also look at something like, public reviews, reviews of your product, or like if you're doing some sort of NPS scoring, you can look at the people who have submitted the NPS survey. Again, these are usually people who have the highest stake at a product. It could be an interesting role to target. And the final point here is that once you have collected these people from the deals, you want to go and you want to try to understand as much as possible about those people. So let's say you're studying one specific role. Let's say they're whatever, somebody who is in charge in compliance, and which is like something that you're selling, some sort of legal compliance solution. Now you start looking at these different profiles, and what you want to understand is what are the different titles that these people have. Again, like different size organizations, different industries may have actually called these kind of people very differently. Sometimes you might have, like in some industries, some companies, you may have like one person who has a different title who has also that function. So, it doesn't have like a specialized function. And then what you also want to understand as you're studying those people, really like studying them, like reading their LinkedIn profiles, etc., you want to look for common patterns in their profile description. And by common patterns, I mean very specifically, they will share things like I'm responsible for XYZ. I've been, maybe they will share some achievement. I was involved in setting up this and creating that, etc. So these are, let's say, jobs to be done, or their jobs, right? Their jobs and responsibilities. But also very, very interesting and undervalued, something that Andre did in one project, I loved it, was actually looking at the keywords and common keywords. And this is like in some cases, like Andre mentioned, like you have a chief of IT and then you look for IT, head of IT or chief of IT, and you end up with hundreds of people. It's not helpful. Sometimes having these specific keywords could really help you identify those people. What you also want to understand is the common connections you have with those buyers, and if those have worked for customers, right? So if, for example, your target buyers are working for a former customer, if they have worked for a former customer, for example, of you. So this is like the connections that you can then leverage when you're reaching out to the new buyer. So with this process, you should really be able to go beyond very high level job titles, which a large organization may, and you may end up nowhere or end up with too many people, so that you can really identify and find the people, the right people that are involved in the purchase of your product.
And I would love just to summarize what Vlad said. It's really important if you want to sell to tier 1, tier 2 accounts, right? You need to dive and, let's say, dig as deep as possible. You need to, as like every corporate account is like a mini market for you. There are a lot of different business units. Could be multiple potential target buyers. So if you'll go with your generic, or let's say with your broad ICP, hey, we sell to VPs of IT, so you'll go nowhere with this. We see it all the time. This is what most companies do. I once asked account executive in one of the recent projects to show me the process, how they define target buyers, and it was like literally, we open Sales Navigator, we put VPs of IT, for example, and then we have like these hundreds of potential buyers, and now we are talking about company that is 25K employees worldwide, right? And then what? And account executive tells me, and I'm just quickly checking, and based on my gut feeling, experience, etc., I'm saying, okay, that would be the right person. So that's why you need to nail it down. And we'll show you a practical example how that ideal customer profile for ABM program will look like in a second, but let's come back to other pillars, right? When you understand this typical roles, right? You know these different buying committee members. You can run additional research, and your goal is to understand responsibilities of these people, right? Or jobs to be done, what they're in charge of, what are their typical KPIs, what are their typical challenges, right? And what are their typical goals. So why we are doing this? Because we want to be relevant, right? And this is aligned with what we shared so far. When you know the typical buying committee structure, and you know who is in charge of what, right? And I mean not only champions or decision makers, also influencers and bloggers, you'll be able to create this entire account collateral. For champions, you're going to educate them about the right ways of solving their challenge, right? How to get buy-in from other stakeholders, how to get buy-in from influencers, right? Also, when you know decision makers and you understand their KPIs and goals, right? You can align your entire offering with the corporate or with the company's goals, right? Because ultimately, when champion is presenting this to presenting your solution to their bosses, right? They would anyhow the first question they would hear is how this helping me to hit my targets, right? So that's the most important thing. Let's say the key stakeholder, the budget holder, wants to see that the investment would help him or her to hit their own targets, right? That's why you need to align with this. Next, when you are aware of the influencers and their responsibilities, their KPIs, their challenges, you create this collateral so you can prepare your champion, right, with the arguments. You can engage with these people as well. You can explain how that specific solution could help them. And ultimately, blockers, when you know who is in charge of maybe procurement, of integrations, whatever, right? You might understand what are their needs, what they want, and prepare the entire collateral, right? So explaining, for example, that your product is certified, that you have the specific integrations, how the migration looks like, etc., etc. So this is one of the most important things that you need to be aware of. And then we have two more pillars: account enrichment and account qualification and disqualification criteria. I think what makes sense when it comes to account qualification and disqualification criteria, we can switch to the practical example that we prepared for you, so you can see how this criteria look like. I might enlarge it a little bit, right? And you can see how the ABM or how the ideal customer profile for ABM program might look like, right? So the breakdown by tiers, then qualification criteria, then accumulated buying committee roles, right, with these different roles, and the disqualification criteria. I didn't, I just made a part of the disqualification criteria, but I think you all got the idea. Let's share how to define qualification and disqualification criteria and why, Vlad.
Absolutely. So when you're selling into enterprise, you usually have very long deal cycle or sales cycle, and it's a lot of effort for your very expensive resource, your account executive. So you can't really afford to spend 9 or 12 or even 18 months chasing a deal that you only have 10% chance of closing. So just because somebody, or a company matches your qualification criteria doesn't mean that they have a need and that you have a reasonable chance of winning and retaining that deal over a long time, right? So this is really the key here to understand, is when you start looking, if you remember, we had this like analysis where we sorted our best customers by revenue and we were looking at tiers. Well, those customers, when you start really studying them, you will start to identify some patterns that go beyond firmographics criteria. So some examples that come to my mind here are that, for example, there is like we work with a customer who were creating, let's say, customer stories for multinational organizations, and they knew that their best, longest staying customers are going to be those that are active in at least 3 different regions, like EMEA, North America, and Latin America, and had at least like 100 salespeople in each of those locations, right? So it's like a very specific criteria which help them understand that, okay, there we can make the biggest impact with these kind of companies. Or another completely different example for a fintech solution where we knew that, again, a solution that helps manage the risk of currency fluctuation when you're selling in different currencies, and then you can basically lose some money if there is fluctuation in currency. We obviously knew that we should be focusing on those companies, even they might be fitting your, let's say, firmographics criteria. If they're not doing a lot of exports, if they're not trading in different currencies that are volatile, that change, then for them, it doesn't make sense to go after those accounts. And they even figured out that those accounts where the payment terms were the longest, like, typical industries and typical types of products and type of trade where you had like very long payments cycle, like were even more sensitive to those fluctuations and would be even a better fit, right? So these are examples of qualification criteria. Now, what's really important to understand is it's not just about chance of closing, but sometimes if we look at also the 5 largest lost deals, if you look and start studying the reasons why we lost this deal, and it's not something that we can fix or we can change, right? So maybe there was something where we missed specific integration, or our solution wasn't compatible with the specific technology stack. Well, if that is the case, we should disregard these or disqualify those accounts in future, right? The example that I shared of that fintech product, well, we knew that, for example, if we had a CFO that has a tenure of more than 2 years, or a very short tenure of less than 3-6 months, that this is not also the right time to sell into those accounts, because like CFOs with a very long tenure had their solutions in place and were not as open of discussing new solutions. But for example, also a new CFO was just like getting onboarded, analyzing what's going on, and again, wasn't the right time also to present a solution to them. So that was another criteria that we could use to potentially disqualify or deprioritize those accounts. So this is how you should be thinking about qualification and disqualification criteria. And as you can see in this example, once you collect them, you just put all of this information in like a simple template that we're sharing here for those who are watching. And with that template, you can easily share this with anybody who can then use that when they're building a list, for example, like taking the accounts from DealFront and having to decide, okay, should I include them in the program? Yes or no? Well, they can just go through those criteria and check.
Question to you guys. Want us to share this template? Let us know in the chat. Type plus if you are interested, and we can share it with you. And let us know how do you like the episode so far. Helpful, interesting, insightful. Any feedback would be great. And while you're typing, great as always. Thanks a lot, Aaron. Thanks a lot, Archana. Aravinda, good insights. Appreciate it, guys. Tomorrow, as you know, on Friday we started we moved our newsletter to Substack. So tomorrow we are going to write about this topic and share this topic again in detail with some more examples. So if you guys can help, and appreciate your feedback, I'm dropping a link to the template so you can make a copy of it. Thanks a lot for coming, and for the fantastic questions. And tomorrow, when we'll share this newsletter in Substack, you have this feature that you can share it on social media. So if you can do this fast, that would be fantastic. We will appreciate it a lot. And thanks a lot for your feedback. So I dropped a link, and inside you'll be able to see the template itself, right? The example that we just shared with you. And also there would be customer research tab, right? Why this is important, I will just explain in a second. Let's come back to our example and the sixth pillar of our ideal customer profile, right? Account enrichment. So unfortunately, it's let's say your ICP development won't be full without in-depth account research, right? Without talking to these buying committee members. You can collect publicly available information, but it won't give you the most important information, right? What triggered the buying process of this account, right? What was actually happening in the organization, so they decided to look for a specific solution, right? Or engaged with your content and then booked a demo with you. There is always a situation, there was always a conversation happening between different units that motivate the champion to start looking for the specific solutions, right? Next, how did their research look like, right? And in most cases, they were comparing anyhow you to some other alternatives. Sometimes that could be a vendor, sometimes it could be a competitor. In some cases, let's think about technology products, right? A lot of companies think about their direct competition. So let's say you sell CRM, you think about HubSpot, Salesforce, Pipedrive, etc., right? But quite often your alternative could be Google Sheets, right? And just doing everything manually. Sometimes it could be hiring a technology vendor to develop or asking IT team to create internal solution for the specific, right? For the specific challenge. So think about these typical alternatives. What was their research, right? How did they evaluate different vendors, and why they decided to talk to you and buy your product, and why they didn't proceed with competitors. This is how you can understand your competitive advantage, right? Then the product value. The simple example, before, after, right? A lot of companies say, hey, we help with this and that. But in reality, sometimes they put, I mean, as marketers, we love to we love to use the numbers, and we can put them in, we can always put them into our favor. Hey, we were able to increase productivity by 250%, but from what? Right? Or we were able to grow revenue by like 600%. But if you are growing revenue from $100 in monthly recurring revenue, then 600% is not is not so impressive, right? And it's absolutely different when you are growing from like 100 million in recurring revenue, right? So think about before and after. Talk about this. What was happening in the business, right? What were the challenges? What were the costs, right? And what is happening now? Then you can see the tangible improvements. That's really important. And lastly, one of the most important things that you need to talk with your buyers is about their channel presence. We see all the time that whenever it comes to B2B, by default, everybody thinks that LinkedIn is a silver bullet, because LinkedIn is the hugest database of all the accounts, right? So this is where we need to engage with them. This is where we need to run ads, etc. But in reality, if you are selling to conservative markets, to conservative teams, think about engineers, doctors, procurement, etc. These people are not active on LinkedIn, right? There are a lot of, if you are selling to IT folks, and if we can dig deeper, because I mean, in reality, we have a lot of experience of selling to IT teams. There are QA engineers, quality assurance, right? There are different developers. These people as well are not active on LinkedIn, but they're active in different Slack communities, Discord communities. There are a lot of old-fashioned forums, right? Think about healthcare associations or logistics, right? These people, in most cases, or engineers, right? In most cases, you will be able to target these people only through industry events or through the associations. If you'll talk about them, for example, are you guys following Full Funnel? Are you following Refined Labs or Chris Walker? No way, they're not following, and they have never heard about these people. I mean, I'm just think about the thought leaders in their space, obviously, just to give you an example. But if you'll ask, okay, where do you get the professional information from? They might mention the specific industry association, the specific community, etc., right? And for you, this would be the most essential channels that you must incorporate into your ABM program, right? So that being said, we have covered everything for today, and we have a few community questions. If you guys have questions, feel free to type these questions in the chat, and we can cover them. We are going to prioritize your questions, so feel free to drop them in the chat. And meanwhile, while you are typing, we can pick up the first question from our community. Let's move to the first one, Yekaterina Yaroslavtseva. What are the best ways to figure out buying intent for target accounts?
This is a great question. And basically, it has to do with what Andrej just shared as he was speaking about account enrichment and understanding the buying triggers. I think this is the key. Once you start to understand the buying triggers and the jobs to be done of your target accounts, you will be able to start thinking about the signals that you can use to identify whether your target accounts are in the buying process or not, or to figure out this buying trigger. So let me just share one example to make it a little bit clearer. So let's say, again, we started the session by sharing this example of sales of learning solutions to corporate learning solutions, where we identify the specific trigger for consumer goods companies, where they acquire specific brands, and then they have this need of basically onboarding new employees, integrating them, making sure that they remain engaged, et cetera. Well, that's relatively easy. Is identifying then consumer goods companies where there was a recent acquisition. And recent, we can define whether that's like between 3 and 6 months, whatever is relevant. Again, studying your customers. That's one concrete example. So that's also another. So when you're thinking about defining account clusters and that accounts that have a shared challenge, a shared use case, it's always very useful if you can link that use case to a specific characteristics that you can identify by researching that account. Let me give you a quick other example. For example, I'm not sure if we mentioned this today, but one of our customers was going after organizations, so selling specific software solution for software teams, right? And they knew, or the target clusters that we were going after were companies who have compliance requirements. So there is like safety issues or other kinds of issues that have remote teams, right? So when we had that situation, we knew the specific challenges they had, etc. This is how we define the cluster. But of course, now that we know, for example, whether they have any compliance requirements, high compliance requirements, we could check that based on the products that they're selling, or the industries that are in, for example, financial service companies or health tech companies would be an example there. But then we could also like simply on LinkedIn check whether they have different locations, whether they have developers in different locations with remote teams, especially if they're in different time zones. That was also another way to identify these accounts that will be a better fit. And then next to that, so these are linked to the specific situation that a company is in. And then another way to look at the buying triggers is obviously based on the intent data, right? And so we shared DealFront examples there. So when you're seeing suddenly a surge in visits, for example, to your high intent pages, people checking out your product integrations, etc. So very high intent, let's say pages, very high intent behavior could be used as another signal that when you combine it with other information, you could infer that they might be in a buying process.
And let's pick up a few more questions. I think those two are aligned. Question from Ariella: how many people in business really understand ICP? My impression is that they define it either too generically as any possible customer, to specifically as their favorites who buy more from them than others. And question from them: I have a client with 7 different distinct categories and ICPs for each. I assume starting with just 1-2 ICPs and an ABM program is a good approach. So, and but can you speak eventually doing that many ICPs at one time? So let's cover this one, those two, right? First of all, you need to distinguish the difference between ideal customer profile for your go-to-market strategy and for the ABM programs. That's why we wanted to start with this today, right? So when it comes to go-to-market strategy, you think about strategical goals, right? And ICP development always aligned. First of all, the first level is your strategic goal. Let's say you're going to a new market, right? You're launching a new product. You decide to go up market. Your ICP might change, right? While when it comes to ABM program, markets, verticals, they are not, even tiers, they are not that much important because we think in terms of clusters. We think about solving specific challenge. And I dropped a link to the episode and to post on Substack where we described the difference when it comes to selecting accounts for the cluster program, right? There are 3 lists. You have ICP cluster, then you have active focus and future pipeline, and you prioritize these accounts based on the revenue potential, relationship, etc. Right? So this is really important to understand. And that's why we described as well generical approach comes. This is like the most typical situation. Generical approach comes from when company doesn't really want to put their efforts into defining the ideal customer profiles, right? They just accumulate all the data, and then they say, hey, like in the example that we described, we have the learning management platform. Every company is interested in it because everybody wants to grow their employees, right? Upskill their team. So as simple as that, right? And then like Ariella said, they just look at the biggest clients and they say, hey, we want clients like this. And then they can identify, let's say, oh, among our top 5 clients that we have like 2 big banks and like 3 big, let's say, hospitals, I don't know, insurance companies. And they don't really dive deeper into why these accounts bought from them, right? What challenges we are solving for them. They just assume by default they bought it because they want to upskill. And then they send it to everybody. So hence, this is how the problem comes when it comes to going too broad or prioritizing just accounts that have the biggest revenue potential, right? And in this case, we even neglect the sales cycle lengths, win rates with the specific vertical these accounts belong to, etc. Right? And coming back to question that's then asked, that comes back to the cluster philosophy. Cluster by default means as just one specific use case, one specific challenge. That let's think for a second about the example that Vlad was talking about, right? Big corporation acquires smaller companies, right? And they want to accelerate the onboarding of people from this smaller company. So they could accept the corporate values, accept the reporting, accept the corporate behavior, right? The communication standards, etc. So that's the key, right? And by default, this is just one ICP. So how your question then should be reformulated as how many cluster programs can we run in parallel? And then it's really depends on what are your marketing and sales resources and how ABM mature they are, right? If you are starting out, that should be always a pilot program, and we have I think a very good episode about it, how to run a pilot program. Check it. You always start with a small team, one marketer, one SDR, one cluster, and just small list of accounts to validate the program idea, develop skills, develop playbooks, right? Nail down the joint collaboration between marketing and sales, and make sure that you get results. When you get these results, then you can present it to the rest of the team and start developing ABM operations, so you can form mini ABM teams and start focusing on different clusters, right? And that being said, I think all other questions we somehow covered during the episode. So thanks a lot for comments. Thanks a lot for asking fantastic questions. Yeah, and I'm really happy to hear that it was helpful. Again, your questions, guys, help us to kind of adjust program to what you want to learn and make it valuable for you. So again, thanks a lot for coming. Thanks a lot for engaging. Thanks a lot for sharing fantastic questions. And see you in 1 week next Thursday. Stay tuned and have a fantastic rest of the week. Cheers. Take care.
See you.